We usually think that myths are ancient stories about gods and heroes that remained in the distant past. However, we have never actually stopped living inside a myth because our brain works as a navigation system looking for meaning rather than just recording objects. For us, the world is not merely a place of things, but a forum for action. This is a crucial distinction. When you look at the world through the eyes of a scientist, you see matter and objects. But when you live in the world, you see meanings and values before you see objects. When you see a fire, you do not just see the process of oxidation. You see warmth or a life-threatening danger. When you see a tool, you see its utility for your goals. This perception of value is the foundation of myth. Myth is the invisible map that tells us where we are, where we should go, and how we should act to get there. This internal architecture of belief is composed of three fundamental elements that appear in every culture and every era. First is known territory, or order. This represents the rules, traditions, and culture that make life predictable and safe. In mythological terms, this is often personified as the Great Father or the wise king who protects his children from the darkness of the night. But order has a dark side. When it becomes too rigid and refuses to change, it turns into the tyrant who stifles life and creativity. The second element is the unknown, or chaos. This is everything we do not yet understand, the domain of all things that fall outside our current maps. Chaos is both destructive and creative. It is represented as the Great Mother or the Dragon of the Deep. It is the source of all new information, but also the source of our deepest fears. The third element is the process of the hero, the knower who mediates between order and chaos. This is the part of our consciousness that voluntarily leaves the safety of the known to face the unknown, brings back something valuable, and uses it to update and revitalize our culture. These images help us regulate our emotions because we feel stable and hopeful when our plans work. However, when an anomaly occurs, when something happens that we did not expect, our map fails. This encounter with the unknown triggers an instinctive response. First fear, then curiosity. Even a small inconvenience, like an elevator that does not arrive, is a minor leak of chaos into our ordered life. It forces us to stop, think, and generate a new plan. But a major catastrophe, such as losing a career or suffering a betrayal, can destroy our entire map of meaning, plunging us into a state of blackness and despair. In these moments, we realize that we are not the masters of our environment, but subjects to the forces we do not understand. While myth is a biological and psychological necessity for survival, it also has a more cunning and social side. In the hands of society, myth becomes a type of speech that can hide reality. Modern social myth does not speak about ancient gods. It speaks about everyday things like sports, food, and advertisements. It works as a second-order semiological system. In a simple language system, a word points to a concept. But in myth, a sign that already has meaning is stolen and turned into an empty form to be filled with a new ideological concept. This process is called naturalization. It takes historical or political choices and presents them as if they were laws of nature, eternal and inevitable. For example, look at the spectacle of professional wrestling. It is not a sport in the sense of a competition for a result. It is a spectacle of excess, a display of pure passions. The wrestler's body is a sign that tells us his character even before the fight begins. An obese, sagging body might represent baseness or the villain, while a fit, disciplined body represents the hero. The crowd does not watch for the outcome. They watch for the intelligible representation of moral situations. In the ring, justice is made visible and mathematical. When a villain is punished, the audience experiences the euphoria of a world where signs finally correspond to causes without contradiction. Another example is found in our relationship with national symbols like certain foods. In some cultures, a steak is not just nutrition, it is a totem of strength and national identity. To eat it is to assimilate a certain essence. Myth takes the real object and removes its history, the fact that it was produced by a certain economic system or involved in political struggle, and replaces that history with a timeless essence. This creates a world that appears innocent and self-evident. One common technique of social myth is called Operation Margarine. This involves admitting the minor flaws of an institution, like the army or the church, only to hide its central problems. By showing a few bad individuals, the underlying institution is saved and presented as a necessary good. We are inoculated with a small dose of evil to prevent us from questioning the whole system. We are constantly balancing between two dangerous extremes. On one side is nihilism. If we abandon our maps of meaning and decide that nothing has intrinsic value, the world turns into a meaningless and cruel joke. Without a goal that justifies our suffering, we cannot even find the strength to act. On the other side is ideological possession, or the lie. This happens when we follow social myths blindly and refuse to update our knowledge in the face of reality. The liar attempts to fit the complex world into a small, convenient scheme. This leads to an accumulation of ignored problems. When we ignore anomalies, they do not disappear. They grow in the darkness until they become monsters that eventually break through the walls of our order and destroy us. The history of the 20th century is a warning of what happens when whole nations choose the security of an emprisative use. Ideological myth over the responsibility of truth. To be a modern individual means to be a mythoclast, a breaker of myths. We must learn to see through the false naturalness of our culture and return things to their historical truth. We must recognize that our social world is fabricated and can be changed. But at the same time, we must not fall into the trap of believing that meaning itself is a fiction. Meaning is a biological instinct. It is the very thing that makes life possible. Our internal guide is the feeling of interest, that spontaneous impulse that draws us toward a new book, a new person, or a new challenge is the voice of our deep intuition. It points the way toward the unknown and the next stage of our development. The true path lies on the razor's edge between order and chaos. We need the structure of our traditions to protect us from the overwhelming terror of the infinite, but we must also remain heroes who are ready to burn our old maps when they no longer fit the world. We must use language to communicate, but we must not allow language to steal our ability to see the world as it is complex, contradictory, and infinitely alive. Every act of voluntary exploration, every time we admit our errors and face the truth, we are participating in the eternal process of creation. We are moving from the state of a user of the world to the state of a creator. The treasure we seek is always found in the place we are most afraid to look. By facing the dragon of the unknown, we do not just find safety, we find the meaning that makes life worth living, despite its tragedies. We must serve the truth above all else and treat ourselves and others not just as objects or social roles, but as divine agents capable of transforming the chaos of potential into the beauty of existence. Only through this constant process of death and rebirth can we find a reconciliation between reality and men, and between the maps we carry and the territory we inhabit.